if there isn't this refinding of institutions,
Yeah.
what are the risks that you've identified for directionally where the USA is headed? Because it feels like America, is the land of free, land of opportunity, land of economic opportunity, an open, free, fair country as a brand, not always in reality.
Yeah.
But it is also a surveillance state, as the UK is. And it feels like directionally it is mirroring a lot of what it hates about China.
Yeah, absolutely.
But doing it worse because it isn't a totalitarian regime.
That's right.
So, and I've often thought, if America sees China as a threat, don't copy China and do it worse.
Right.
Beat China at freedom.
Right.
And therefore, CBDCs are the wrong answer.
Right.
Bitcoin to me is naturally the right answer.
Right.
Because it's a freedom technology.
That's right. Yeah. No, and this is the argument that I make in the white paper on CBDCs is, I start with this contrast between the American model of political economy, ostensibly from our past, and then the Chinese model of political economy. Not because China is actually unique in this regard, but because it is the new model that virtually every country in the world is adopting. And that is a strong state that leads economic life, directs economic life, and also fully surveils the population. And so the theory behind that is that if you have full surveillance, you no longer need democracy because the government can now know what you want based on your behaviors, which can be funneled through, a series of predictive analytic, algorithms to tell the government what policies are favored and disfavored by the population.
But do states sleepwalk into this, or is this centrally planned as this will be best for our country?
Both. I would say a little bit of both. I would say a lot of people do sleepwalk into it because they simply can't imagine the possibility that power could be misused. And
is technology one of the reasons this happens? Because you start to look at some of the worst in technology. If you think during what happened with the COVID crisis, whether it's crisis or not, but with the consideration of vaccine passports.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, especially within our community, people rejected these passports. The idea that you could have to prove your health, traveling across borders, which, by the way, sometimes you have to do anyways, going into certain jurisdictions, you have to have certain inoculations. But that idea just was a step too far. But I can see how somebody within government thinks this is a good idea because they have the technology and it makes everything more efficient without fully considering what this actually means as a societal construct.
Right, right. No, that's exactly right. We've had proof of vaccination requirements for a very long time. In different social institutions at different scales, pretty much ever since vaccines were invented. For example, it's very hard to enroll your child in a public school in the United States without having proof of vaccinations.
The MMR. Do you have the MMR here?
Yeah, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
And so you have to demonstrate that your child is not going to be a vector for other children, which I think, at the level of that school is a very reasonable request to make. The problem is when you then create a vaccine policy for 400 million people that is enforced, to enter and exit borders, that is enforced, in contexts where perhaps it has nothing to do with the actual, purpose of that transaction or that interaction. And so it's the sort of AML KYC-ification of everything, where there's no distinctions anymore between the information I need and the information I want. Just give me all the information.
But see, I see it with, when I look at the Chinese model,
yeah,
social credit scores, I just see this as control, decisions based on control. But I can see in kind of more Western liberal democracies that it's done through naivety. Sometimes maybe control.
Yeah.
But I can see how we sleepwalk in these decisions because the logic of the technology makes sense.
Right.
And I could come up with 10 different examples immediately of different ways where technology seems, surveillance. You can make the argument for surveillance, and crime reduction. In the UK, I listened to an interview with somebody who worked for MI6, and they talked about all the different plots they foiled. And we've had terrorist plots. We had the tube bombings. We had the failed tube bombings. We've had a number of knife attacks. We had the ones
stabbing on London Bridge,
Borough Market. So we've had successful terrorist attacks where innocent people have died. I mean, what was it? 52 on the. I think it was 52 on the tube attacks and the Borough Market. I can't remember. 13, 14 people just stabbed to death.
Right.
And he was talking about how they use surveillance. Both technology, but actually stationing officers to track people and they follow people. Makes a very good argument for the safety and protection of the country using technology. Mm-hmm. It's an argument it's hard to disagree with, but when that comes to the point where everything is surveilled NSA standard, you can see how that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the right answer is.
It's the 10 most surveilled cities in the world, and they're all in China apart from London.
Well, don't they have? Didn't Neil send that article? They've got 55% or something of all.
Yeah,
I tweeted about that recently. Hold on, London isn't in China.
No, they're all in China apart from
London. Yeah. So
it's not a good list to be on, though.
It is not a great list to be on, but we've always known we're one of the most.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I'll give you another example. Did you hear a couple of years ago in the UK, a young girl called Sarah Everard was murdered? A blonde girl was murdered by a policeman.
Oh, I think, I did hear about this.
Yeah, so she was my friend.
Oh, no.
She worked for me. I had an advertising agency in London. She worked for me for 5 years, knew her very well. Huh. And when she went missing, my old business partner, Ollie, messaged me and said, Sarah's gone missing. Sarah Everard. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, she's not been seen for 24 hours. I was like, huh. So I had a friend who worked at the Met Police, and I phoned him up and he explained me what was going to happen. Now, he was very clear, if she's not found within 24 hours, there's a very high chance she's been killed.
Yeah.
Okay. If she's been killed, you want the perpetrator to be caught.
Right.
You absolutely want that person to be caught because you don't want them to do this to somebody else.
Right.
The way he was caught was on the road he was on, there was a camera in the bus.
Right.
So buses now have cameras in them to protect the bus drivers.
Right.
They caught the moment where he had her at the side of the road. He was a policeman, and he showed his warrant card, and he arrested her under the something to do with the COVID Act that she shouldn't have been out, she should have been home because we're on lockdown. We don't have to debate all the lockdown rules. The point being is he was caught because of that camera, that moment. And not only did it capture him, it captured his car and his number plate. Right. They tracked the number plate to the rental company that he rented it from and found him. Right. And he's now in jail. He's been given a full life sentence. Again, you can see, especially young women in London, after that would want there to be cameras and surveillance because they might feel more protected. Yeah. And this is the area I find super tricky because I fully agree with that we shouldn't be the most surveilled. I fully agree that we should deserve privacy, but I can also see the defense of why you would have these.
Right, right. Exactly.
And I don't know where to fall on this.
Well, this is why every city in the United States is investing significantly in camera technology and other surveillance tech. I mean, some of the biggest technology startups in the US are surveillance technology startups. And the way that public consent for this is, to use Chomsky's word, manufactured, is crime prevention and crime reduction. And there's a lot of data that these companies can point to. That the Chinese state can also point to. I mean, like one of the cities that I was reading about for this white paper installed, a bunch of surveillance at an intersection where bicycles were regularly being stolen, and bike thefts dropped to zero. So people want the ability to recover their property if it's stolen. They want the ability to, find perpetrators of crimes. That's all true. The question becomes, and I actually think this needs to be answered predominantly at a local level, is for the integrity of this community, what type of policing practices, and I would put surveillance under the umbrella of policing, what type of policing will be most effective.
Can we have good surveillance then? Can we separate it from what is an invasion of privacy?
I think we absolutely can. And the answer for that is going to be different in different communities.
Right.
And so this is also where we get into a very interesting question, the difference between laws and norms. Norms are actually the social fabric, the practices, the expectations, the values that hold society together. When you have a collapse of norms and you start relying on laws exclusively to police a society, that's a collapsed state. I would say that society, it has collapsed. And this is what's happening at what we see in the United States, not just locally, but at the highest levels of government. Like, there are things that presidents do that people routinely ask, well, can a president do that? Well, it's not illegal because nobody ever thought to legislate that, because the thinking was that a president would comport themselves with a certain kind of character and adhere to certain norms. If we can't assume shared norms, I would suggest we don't have a society. And so the process of refounding, I think, starts at the local level of understanding what are our shared norms in this community, and then scales from there.
Can you point to some of this breakdown being because of the failure of money? Is that one of the reasons? Because I know, for example, now my children will not be able to afford a home at all. The only reason they're not going to be saddled with debt is because I'm not allowing them to, but plenty of their friends and peers will be.
Yeah.
And they have this expectation that they can't get on the ladder anymore. I've had this conversation with my son. Like, how do I even get to where you got? How do I get to a home? Like, I just can't see it. And we know there's this kind of amongst the youth, this is kind of like detachment from them between themselves and the way governance occurs. I mean, didn't you talk about that in your article?
Yeah.
So, like, what do we do about that?
Yeah. Well, a big part of this is, so some of this is structural.
Yeah.
Actually, most of it is structural. One of the markers of a declining or collapsing society is that the sphere of new economic activity shrinks.
Right.
And when you're young and you are not capitalized, you're not very well resourced, what do you have to make your way in the world? You have your productive labor. And so you need places to be able to start. You need a 0 point to start from. In societies where those initial steps on the ladder are not available, typically what young people do is they exit. They go to other societies where they are available. And so, there's a historian named Peter Turchin who has written about the colonization of the Americas, and not just him, many other historians, in effect as the project of second and third sons of European nobility who were not inheriting the family fortunes and basically couldn't find anything else to do. They wanted to be the masters of something. They wanted to be property owners. They wanted to be wealthy. So where did they go? They went to the New World where they could, conquer and...
Well, we know this happens. Like, Danny, you might know this better than me, but like places like Tonga, I mean, what's his name? Lord
Fusatua.
Yeah, didn't he talk about the idea that there's no opportunity for little opportunity for young people in Tonga. So they end up going to New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah.
Right.
I know Ireland specifically has an issue outside of Dublin. My father lives in Ireland. And a lot of people there will, like, one of his neighbour, both their children are moved to Australia to work because there's opportunity, because there's no work locally within the area that they're from in Ireland. And a lot of people in Ireland will move to the UK to get jobs. Is that basically what you're talking about?
Yeah, that, on the one hand, there's the magic of the frontier, which is kind of this open, at least in the minds of, those going there to make their fortunes, this open space where they can start from nothing. As the frontiers close, then it becomes a question of how fast is the pie, the productive economy, growing. In areas where it's growing quickly, then there are these 0 points where people can enter. In areas where it's stagnant or declining, they can't enter. This is why we have to solve the energy problem. Yeah.
Well, so I wonder, does this problem occur because the state has interfered too much or not interfered enough? So when I say interfered too much, have they created too many barriers for people for economic opportunity? Or thinking about the work that OVIC does, have they not created enough opportunity?
Yeah.
And I don't know where, and perhaps it's a mixture of both.
Right. The generation of economic value is, I would say, most successfully demonstrated by political economies that have that privilege a free market with some amount of state intervention to enforce a set of shared game conditions.
Okay.
So that is a thesis that is up for debate. Some would say, no state involvement whatsoever. Like markets truly, unfettered. Others would say, no, the state must direct markets. This is the Chinese model. And in terms of just sheer growth, they haven't been proven wrong. The question is how much of the value that the Chinese economy has generated over the past decades is actually piggybacking on the value generated in more free market societies. So the technology, the innovation, the corporate forms that it, gets born in the US and then picked up in China. And so this is the thesis or the argument that I make in the CBDC paper is like we can see historical examples of this in the medieval period in Europe, where those local jurisdictions that adopted freer market norms then became innovation hubs that positively impacted even the authoritarian jurisdictions that were nearby because they created a rising tide. And so this is a balance. There isn't going to be one set of policy prescriptions for every community. I think that every locale needs to answer this question for themselves. But broadly, a inclination toward a freer market, I think, has been shown to create bottom-up value much more effectively than a top-down model of state-driven growth.